The moment I saw my husband flicking through my phone, my heart stopped, but not because I feared he would uncover the truth. It was because I knew he would stumble upon those messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he pulled it back effortlessly and continued reading. I watched his face, how it shifted with every line he read, and I felt my life crumbling in an instant. Yes, he was about to discover the truth. But not all of it. His hands trembled as he turned the pages, and I knew this was the moment. The moment he would read the message that would destroy everything. The one that would either explain it all, or make things even more complicated. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in his hands, and a new notification appeared on the screen. I saw his face go pale as he read the sender's name. He froze. Not even a blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I was nervous. My nerves twisted with the realization of what I had done. His breath quickened. I could hear it, even from the 2 meters that separated us. This was exactly what I had feared the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. A mistake that changed everything, and now I didn't know what to do. But let me tell you how it all started. Before I share with you the secret I've been trying so hard to keep hidden, leave a comment with the city you're watching this from, and answer me this: have you ever had a secret you tried to hide, but in the end, you just couldn't keep it to yourself? I've spent countless nights lying awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, wondering when things had changed. It wasn't a sudden shift, no dramatic fights or hurtful words. It was the slow erosion of intimacy, the gradual disappearance of affection that used to be the lifeblood of our marriage. My husband and I had been together for over 30 years, and for the most part, it had been comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. But somewhere along the way, we lost each other. There were no grand revelations, no obvious moments when we realized that the distance between us was growing. It was just the quiet drift of routine. The quiet hum of our daily lives. I made dinner, he worked late, we shared the occasional glass of wine, but that was about it. No sparks. No excitement. Just silence. I had tried to ignore it at first, telling myself that this was just the natural course of things. After all, what do you expect after so many years? But then, one evening, as I stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the 3rd night in a row, I felt it, the sudden weight of my own loneliness. It hit me all at once. The realization that I was invisible to him. That I had become nothing more than a fixture in his life. Not a partner, not a lover, just a presence. At first, I tried to distract myself. I immersed myself in hobbies, tried to rekindle old passions. I spent more time with friends, took long walks by myself, and read books that filled the silence around me. But nothing seemed to help. The void inside of me only grew bigger. And then, just when I thought I couldn't stand it any longer, something unexpected happened. Our grandson, Tom, came to live with us. He was temporarily staying with us while his parents were away, and he was in his early 20s, full of life, full of energy. I hadn't seen him much in the past few years, but now, having him under the same roof was like a breath of fresh air. He was different from the rest of us. Young. Unpredictable. Excitable. When I first saw him, I noticed how he had grown. His face had become sharper, his eyes more intense. I found myself paying attention to him more than I should have. It was subtle at first, just little moments of connection. A shared joke, a laugh over dinner. But there was something about the way he looked at me that made my heart skip a beat. Something unfamiliar. Something that made me feel noticed. At first, I dismissed it as harmless. After all, I was just his grandmother, right? But as the days went by, I couldn't ignore the fact that every time our eyes met, there was this strange, unspoken tension between us. I tried to push it away, but it kept resurfacing. It was one evening, after dinner, when I first felt it. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and I was cleaning up the kitchen. I glanced at him from across the room, and for a moment, our eyes locked. It was like time slowed down. My heart raced, and I quickly looked away, pretending I hadn't noticed. But I could feel his gaze on me. I could feel him studying me, like he was trying to figure something out. I didn't know what to make of it, but it unsettled me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, alive. I began to wonder if I had been craving this all along. The feeling of being seen, of being desired, even if it was just a fleeting glance. It was foolish, I knew that. But it was something I hadn't experienced in so long. Days passed, and the tension between us only grew. I tried to pretend that nothing had changed, but the truth was, something had shifted. There were moments when our fingers brushed accidentally, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. Each time it happened, I pulled away, but the desire to be close to him only grew stronger. One afternoon, after a particularly long day, I found myself sitting next to him on the porch. We were talking about something trivial, the weather, the news, anything to fill the silence. But the air around us felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. As he looked at me, his eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the overwhelming desire to feel wanted again. But in that moment, I reached out and touched his hand. It was brief, just a simple touch, but it was enough. He didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at me, his gaze intense. And then, without thinking, I leaned in. Our lips met in a kiss. A soft, tentative kiss, like a question. And I kissed him back. We kissed. The moment it happened, everything changed. I felt the weight of it settle over me. A part of me wanted to pull away, to stop, but another part of me was consumed by the feeling of being alive again. In that kiss, I found something I had been missing for so long. Something that had been buried deep inside me. But even as I kissed him, a voice in my head screamed at me, telling me this was wrong. This was my grandson. This was a betrayal of everything I had ever known. But in that moment, the line between right and wrong blurred, and all I could think about was the feeling of being wanted. I pulled away first, my breath shallow, my heart racing. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. There was a silence between us, thick with the weight of what had just happened. I knew I should apologize, I should pull away and pretend it was a mistake. But the truth was, I didn't know what to do. I was lost. And in that moment, I realized that I had made a choice. A choice that would change everything. The days after that kiss felt like a strange blur. Everything around me seemed to exist in two worlds, one where I was still the wife, the mother, the grandmother, and another where I was someone else entirely, someone with desires I had never allowed myself to acknowledge before. I couldn't look at Tom without remembering the softness of his lips, the electricity that ran through my body the moment we touched. It was as if something had awakened inside me, something I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was a mistake. A fleeting moment of weakness. It had to be. I had no reason to feel this way. He was my grandson. There was nothing about our relationship that should have crossed that line. But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lying to myself. I had been lying to myself for years about everything. About my marriage. About my feelings. About my needs. The house felt emptier than ever. My husband, Daniel, continued his routine as though nothing had changed. He went to work in the morning, came home at night, and we shared meals in silence. I had grown so accustomed to this pattern that it no longer felt like we were partners, but roommates, passing through life together without truly engaging with each other. He had always been a man of few words, but the silence between us had deepened over time. I tried to break it, to spark something in our conversations, but it never worked. He had stopped listening. He had stopped trying. And I had stopped expecting him to care. Tom, on the other hand, had become more than just a presence in the house. I couldn't pinpoint when it happened, but he was no longer just the young man living with us temporarily. He had become the one person who made me feel alive again. Every conversation with him felt different. It was as if he could see me in a way no one else had in years. His compliments, his quiet attention, the way he looked at me, all of it stirred something within me that I had buried for so long. And now, after that kiss, it felt like a dam had broken. I avoided him at first, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But every time I walked into a room and saw him, my heart skipped a beat. His presence seemed to fill the space, making everything feel so much more intense. I tried to distance myself, but it didn't work. He was always there, and with each passing day, I found myself more drawn to him. And it terrified me. I had never felt like this before. Not even when Daniel and I were first married. Our relationship had always been steady, calm, and predictable. But now, everything felt uncertain. I didn't know how to navigate this new version of myself, this woman who suddenly wanted things she had long suppressed. One afternoon, when Daniel was out of town for a meeting, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Tom came outside and sat next to me. We didn't speak for a while, the silence between us oddly comfortable. But I could feel the tension in the air, thick and undeniable. His presence felt electric, and I was all too aware of the proximity between us. "I've always liked sunsets," he said after a while, breaking the silence. "They make everything feel possible." I nodded, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through me at his words. "I used to like them too," I said quietly. "When I was younger." He glanced at me then, his eyes soft. "What changed?" I didn't know how to answer that. What had changed? I hadn't realized until this moment that the part of me that used to feel alive, the part that had once dreamt and hoped, had somehow disappeared over the years. And now, sitting here with him, I realized how much I missed that part of myself. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, I just looked at him, and in that moment, everything shifted. I wanted to reach out to him, to touch him, but I didn't. Instead, I stood up abruptly. "I should get dinner started," I said, trying to sound normal. I walked back inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. I didn't know if it was something that would pass or something that would continue to grow, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was there, and it was real. That night, after dinner, I found myself in the living room alone, lost in my thoughts. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Daniel. Just a simple text saying he'd be home late, as usual. But as I sat there, I realized something. I had spent years waiting for him to notice me, to show me some kind of affection. But it never came. And now, here I was, feeling more alive than I had in years, because of someone else. I couldn't deny it anymore. I had crossed a line. A line I couldn't uncross. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The guilt gnawed at me, but beneath it was something else, a deep longing I couldn't explain. I had been starving for attention, for connection, for something more than what my marriage had become. And now, with Tom, I had found it. But at what cost? My mind raced with conflicting emotions. I loved my husband. Or at least, I had once loved him. But something was missing. something I couldn't get back. And now, I was falling for someone else. Someone I shouldn't have feelings for. The thought of it sent a wave of nausea through me, but at the same time, I couldn't help the way I felt. I had to make a choice. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready to make it. What would it mean for my marriage? For Tom? For everything? But one thing was clear, things were no longer as simple as they had once been. The kiss had changed everything. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could live in this limbo. I closed my eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I knew that whatever happened next, my life would never be the same. The days after the kiss felt like a heavy fog had descended upon me, suffocating every thought, every movement. I couldn't look at Tom without feeling the weight of what had happened between us, and yet I couldn't escape the pull he had on me. I avoided him as much as I could, keeping myself busy with tasks around the house, pretending nothing had changed. But every glance, every touch, every accidental moment of closeness made it impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the kiss, though. It was everything that followed. The way he looked at me, his eyes lingering on mine longer than they should. The way he seemed to find excuses to be near me, to talk to me, to be in the same room. I could feel the tension building between us, and with every passing day, I found it harder to breathe. I had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. Daniel was oblivious, of course. He never noticed. He never cared. And it wasn't as if I was surprised by this, but a small part of me wished that he would. That he would see the distance growing between us, that he would feel the emptiness that I had felt for so long. But he didn't. He went on with his life, his work, his routine. And I went on with mine, pretending that everything was fine, even though I knew it wasn't. I tried to justify my actions, tried to tell myself that it was a moment of weakness. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a cry for something I had been missing for so long. It was a need that I had buried deep inside me, a need for attention, for desire, for connection. And in that moment, with Tom, I felt something that I hadn't felt in years. Alive. Wanted. Seen. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about anything more than the simple human need for intimacy. But that didn't make it right. The guilt gnawed at me, but it was tempered by something else. Something I couldn't name. It was like a spark had been lit, and now, I couldn't put it out. I kept telling myself it was wrong, that I had to stop, but each time I saw him, it felt like the pull was even stronger. It was late one evening, just after dinner, when I found myself sitting in the living room, the house unusually quiet. Daniel was in his study, as usual, buried in his work. I had been cleaning up after the meal, and now, with the house empty except for Tom and me, the silence felt suffocating. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe it was because the house felt too quiet, or maybe it was because I was so tired of pretending. But I stood up and walked into the kitchen, where Tom was getting himself a drink. He looked at me as I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was something in the air, something thick with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. It was as if the weight of the past few days hung between us, heavier than the air we were breathing. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice breaking the silence. His words felt like an invitation, a challenge. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. How could I possibly explain the whirlwind of emotions inside me? "I'm fine," I replied, my voice too tight, too forced. I could hear the lie in my own words, and I hated myself for it. But what else could I say? How could I admit the truth, even to myself? He stepped closer, and I felt a flutter in my chest. I could see it in his eyes, that same longing that mirrored my own. The same hunger for something we didn't have. I knew I should step back. I knew I should stop this before it went any further. But instead, I stayed where I was, rooted to the spot. And when he reached out, I didn't pull away. It was like a magnetic force had taken over. Before I knew it, I was standing there in the kitchen, his hand gently brushing against mine. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was subtle, almost tentative, but it felt like the most intimate thing I'd ever experienced. His touch sent a shiver through me, and I felt my heart race. I didn't know what was happening, didn't know what this was, but I couldn't stop it. His hand lingered on mine for a moment before he gently pulled me toward him. I didn't resist. I couldn't. My body moved on its own, drawn to him like I had no control. And when his lips met mine again, it was different this time. It wasn't the tentative, unsure kiss from the other night. It was urgent. Desperate. It felt like we were both trying to grasp onto something that was slipping away. And yet, for that brief moment, it felt like everything I had been missing, everything I had been longing for, was finally within reach. I pulled away first, my breath shallow, my mind spinning. I couldn't believe what had just happened. What was I doing? What were we doing? But when I looked at him, I saw the same confusion, the same questioning in his eyes. Neither of us spoke. There were no words that could explain what had just transpired. I wanted to say something, to tell him that we couldn't do this, that it was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I left him standing there, alone in the kitchen. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I didn't want to see the emotions that I knew were in his eyes, the same emotions I was trying to suppress in myself. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the moment over and over again in my mind. It was like a fire that couldn't be extinguished, no matter how hard I tried. I knew I should feel guilty, that I should be ashamed of myself. But the truth was, I didn't. Not completely. Instead, I felt something else, something more dangerous. I felt alive. And that scared me more than anything. I had crossed a line. I didn't know how to go back. And the more I tried to convince myself that it was just a momentary lapse, the more I realized it wasn't. It was something more. And I wasn't sure I was ready to face the consequences of what I had done. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't go back. Things had already changed, and there was no way to undo what had been done. The question now was, where did we go from here? I didn't know. And that uncertainty filled me with a sense of dread. But I also knew that somehow, I had already made my choice. The following days felt like a dream, but a dream I couldn't wake up from. Each moment was weighed down with the heavy realization that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I tried to focus on the mundane tasks of everyday life, preparing meals, cleaning the house, answering calls, pretending that everything was normal. But every step I took felt like I was walking through quicksand, slowly sinking deeper and deeper into something I couldn't control. I avoided Tom as much as possible. Every time our eyes met, my heart raced and the guilt surged, crashing over me in waves. It was impossible to look at him without remembering the kiss, without feeling the heat of it burning in my chest. But at the same time, there was something else there. Something I couldn't deny. Every time he was near, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't just the physical attraction, it was the emotional connection, the feeling that, for the first time in so long, someone was seeing me. Really seeing me. And it terrified me. The guilt, however, was an ever-present shadow, creeping into my thoughts whenever I wasn't occupied with something else. It whispered to me, reminding me that what I had done was wrong, that I had betrayed everything I stood for. But what was I betraying? Wasn't I entitled to feel something? Wasn't I entitled to be seen, to be desired, even if it was fleeting? It wasn't about love. It wasn't about anything more than the simple human need to be recognized, to be wanted. But even as I tried to convince myself that it was just a momentary lapse, I knew deep down that it was more than that. That night, as I stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables, I felt Tom's presence behind me. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze pressing down on my back. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the task at hand, but the tension in the room was palpable. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. "You don't have to keep avoiding me," he said finally, his voice low, hesitant. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face him. "I'm not avoiding you," I replied, my voice too tight, betraying the lie. "I'm just busy." He took a step closer, and I could feel him behind me, so close I could almost feel his breath. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. "I know what happened. I know what we did." I froze. The knife in my hand felt like it weighed a ton. My breath caught in my throat as I turned slowly to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, my voice shaking. "It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. We can't do this." Tom's eyes softened, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't quite place. "We don't have to do anything," he said quietly. "But you can't keep pretending like nothing happened. Like it didn't mean anything." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "It was a mistake," I repeated, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. Tom took a step closer, and I felt a shiver run through me. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing against mine, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. The touch was light, innocent even, but it felt like everything had shifted in that one moment. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't pretend either. Not anymore." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. This wasn't just about a kiss anymore. This was about something deeper, something that had been awakened between us, something neither of us could ignore. But that didn't change the fact that it was wrong. That it could destroy everything, my marriage, my family, our lives. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how we got here. But I can't keep going down this path." Tom's hand was still resting on mine, and I could feel the warmth of his touch seeping into my skin. "Then tell me what to do," he said, his voice filled with desperation. "Tell me how to fix this." I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. "There's nothing to fix," I said, my heart aching. "I've made my choices. I've ruined everything." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. I wanted to tell him that we could never be more than what we were, that we could never cross that line again. But the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself looking at him, really looking at him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something stir inside me. Something I couldn't control. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Tom nodded slowly, his eyes sad but understanding. "Me neither," he said quietly. "But we can't keep pretending like everything's normal." And just like that, the barrier between us that had been built in the days since that kiss started to crumble. It was a subtle thing, like a thread being pulled loose, unraveling everything that had once felt safe. In that moment, I realized that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't pretend like nothing had changed. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I walked away from him then, leaving him standing in the kitchen. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how we would move forward from this. But I knew one thing for sure, everything had changed. And I didn't know if I was ready to face the consequences of that change. As I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The guilt. The fear. The longing. It was all too much, and I couldn't escape it. Not anymore. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What had I done? What would happen now? I had no answers. No way of knowing what the future would bring. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were filled with tension, an undercurrent of unease that neither of us could ignore. I couldn't look at Tom without feeling a deep ache in my chest. It was a confusing, contradictory feeling, a mixture of guilt and something else, something I wasn't sure I wanted to acknowledge. I kept replaying the moments between us in my mind, trying to make sense of it all, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't. I couldn't make sense of what had happened, and I didn't know if I wanted to. I was suffocating, trapped in this web of emotions that I couldn't untangle. The guilt was overwhelming, a constant reminder of what I had done, of the line I had crossed. But underneath it all was something else, a longing, a desire for something I had been missing for years. I had spent so much of my life suppressing my own needs, my own desires, that now, when I was finally confronted with them, I didn't know how to handle them. I tried to distract myself. I spent more time on tasks around the house, keeping busy, pretending that everything was fine. But even as I cleaned, as I cooked, as I did the endless chores that filled my days, my thoughts kept returning to Tom. To the way he looked at me. To the kiss. It was impossible to escape it. Daniel, as usual, remained oblivious. He had no idea what was happening, no idea about the shifting dynamic between me and Tom. And part of me was grateful for that. It was easier to pretend, easier to ignore the truth, when Daniel wasn't asking questions. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment toward him. He had stopped seeing me years ago. He had stopped trying. And now, when I was finally seen by someone else, it was too late. Tom, for his part, seemed to retreat after that night. He became quieter, more distant, and I couldn't tell if it was because he regretted what had happened or if it was because he felt the same internal conflict I did. Either way, it didn't make things easier. If anything, it only made the situation more complicated. Every time he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes, something that I wasn't sure I could handle. It was late one evening, after dinner, when I found myself alone in the living room. I had just finished cleaning up, and the house felt eerily quiet. I couldn't hear Daniel's footsteps, couldn't hear him talking in the other room. It was just me and my thoughts, a silence that felt like a pressure on my chest. I was lost in thought when I heard the door creak open behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. I could feel his presence before I even saw him. Tom. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching me. I could feel his gaze on me, the weight of it pressing into me. It was like he was waiting for something, waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge the tension between us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to break the silence. So I kept my back to him, pretending to focus on the book I had been reading. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. "I'm fine," I replied, not looking up. It was the lie I had been telling myself for days now, and somehow, it felt more true than ever. But Tom didn't buy it. I could tell by the way he stepped closer, the way his presence filled the space behind me. "No, you're not," he said softly. "We both know that." I didn't answer. What could I say? How could I explain everything that was happening inside me? The confusion. The guilt. The desire. I couldn't put it into words. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, finally turning around to face him. My voice cracked with the weight of the emotion I had been holding inside. "I don't know what this is. What we're doing. Tom's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes, something tender, something that made my heart ache. "I don't want to hurt you," he said quietly. "But I can't pretend either. Not anymore." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "We can't do this," I whispered, my hands trembling. "We can't keep pretending like nothing happened." He took another step forward, his face inches from mine. "Then tell me what we're supposed to do," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "Tell me what comes next." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat loud and frantic. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle this situation. All I knew was that something inside me was pulling me toward him, and I was terrified of what would happen if I let myself give in. "I don't know," I whispered, shaking my head. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it go away." Tom reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was gentle, but it sent a shockwave through me. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my body reacting to him in ways I couldn't control. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I had spent so many years avoiding this, pretending that everything was fine, that I didn't need anything. And now, with Tom standing in front of me, everything I had buried, everything I had suppressed, was coming to the surface. "I can't lose you either," I finally said, my voice trembling. "But I don't know what this is. I don't know what to do with this feeling." He was quiet for a long time, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. And in that silence, I knew. I knew I couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. "I don't know what's going to happen next," I said, my voice raw with emotion. "But I can't keep pretending. I can't keep living in this lie." Tom didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at me. But then, slowly, he reached out and took my hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't anything that could undo the mess we had made. But it was enough. It was a sign, a silent promise that we would figure this out together. Or at least, try to. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I tried to deny it, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, this was happening. This was real. And I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing: there was no going back. I woke up the next morning with a strange heaviness hanging over me. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if the world outside had paused. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the fan in the corner. For a brief moment, I considered pretending that everything was fine, slipping back into my old routine as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't possible. Not anymore. Tom's touch lingered in my mind, and I could still feel the weight of his hand in mine. The words he had spoken echoed in my thoughts: "I don't want to lose you." How could I ignore that? How could I ignore the way he had looked at me, the way everything had felt so undeniable? I had always prided myself on being in control, on keeping everything in my life neatly compartmentalized. But that illusion had shattered the moment Tom had kissed me. And now, I couldn't pretend. Not when everything felt so raw, so open. I got out of bed, walking silently to the kitchen. The house still felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I went through the motions of making coffee, trying to focus on something, anything, to quiet my racing thoughts. But the quietness of the house, the stillness of the air, seemed to press in on me from all sides. Daniel hadn't come home the night before, which wasn't unusual. He had a habit of staying late at the office, often working into the night. I used to wait up for him, but now, I didn't. It was as though we had both silently agreed that the spaces between us didn't matter anymore. He had his life, and I had mine. And now, there was Tom, too. And that changed everything. I couldn't deny that something had shifted within me. Every time I looked at Tom, I saw not just the young man he was but the man who had made me feel alive again. I had spent so many years suppressing my own needs, my own desires, thinking they didn't matter. But now, everything I had repressed for so long came rushing to the surface. I wanted to feel needed. Wanted. Alive. And Tom had given me that feeling. But I couldn't ignore the guilt. The weight of what I had done, not just to Daniel, but to myself. I had betrayed everything I believed in, everything I had built over the years. I had let my emotions run wild, and now I had to face the consequences of that. I thought about the conversation I had had with Tom the night before. We couldn't keep pretending like nothing had happened. The tension between us had reached a breaking point, and neither of us could ignore it anymore. But what were we supposed to do? What was the next step? I didn't have the answers. I didn't even know what I wanted. My mind kept drifting back to that kiss. The way it had felt so natural, so right, even as I knew it was wrong. How could I reconcile the two? The guilt and the desire? The shame and the longing? I couldn't. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space across from me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was at a crossroads. I didn't know which path to take. I didn't know where to go from here. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't continue to live in the lie that everything was fine, that everything was the way it had always been. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to face the reality of what had happened. How had I let this happen? How had I allowed myself to get so caught up in something I knew would destroy everything? I was lost. Completely lost. Later that day, when Tom came down for lunch, I tried to act normal. I tried to slip back into the role I had always played, the wife, the mother, the grandmother. But it was impossible. I could feel the tension between us, thick and unspoken. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. And I could feel it in myself, that same pull, that same undeniable desire to be near him, to be seen by him. We didn't speak much during lunch. The silence between us was suffocating, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know how to navigate this new dynamic between us. After lunch, I retreated to my room. I needed space, time to think. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. What was I supposed to do? How could I make sense of this? I couldn't keep living in this in-between space, caught between the past and the present, between the life I had built and the new life I had unknowingly stepped into. I needed to make a decision. I needed to decide what I wanted, what I was willing to risk. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The lines between right and wrong had blurred, and now I was standing in the middle of a storm, unsure of which direction to go. The sound of footsteps outside my door startled me, and I quickly wiped away the tear that had slipped down my cheek. I hadn't even realized I had been crying. The door opened slightly, and Tom's face appeared in the doorway. He looked hesitant, unsure. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said softly, his voice low and tentative. "You're not disturbing me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm just thinking." He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. "About us?" he asked carefully, as if testing the waters. I didn't answer at first. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure how to put the storm inside me into words. "I don't know what this is," I finally said, my voice cracking. "I don't know how we got here. How everything got so complicated." Tom walked over to me slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I don't know either, he said quietly. But I know that I can't just ignore it. I can't pretend like I don't feel something. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to make things worse. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. You don't have to say anything, I said softly. We don't have to figure this out right now. But Tom didn't move. He stood there, looking at me, as if waiting for me to make the next move. And in that moment, I realized that neither of us could escape what had happened. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and full of unspoken words. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing, I couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. Something had to give. Something had to change. And as Tom stood there, waiting, I realized that I had already made my choice. The days that followed were a blur of tension, confusion, and guilt. Every time I saw Tom, my heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just the kiss anymore, it was everything that had happened since. The looks, the touch, the unspoken words that hung between us. We were walking on a razor's edge, and I knew it. I could feel it in the way we moved around each other, in the way we avoided each other's gaze, in the way every silence felt too heavy to bear. I spent most of my time avoiding him, retreating into the safety of my own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. But it was like trying to ignore the storm that raged within me. It was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. I felt his touch. I heard his voice, soft and tentative, asking me what I wanted, what we should do. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know how to navigate this mess I had created. It had started so innocently, a look, a conversation, a moment of vulnerability. And now it had grown into something so much bigger than I could handle. Tom seemed to sense my distance. He kept his silence, but I could feel the tension radiating from him, too. He was trying to be patient, trying to give me the space I needed, but I could see it in his eyes. He was waiting for me to make a decision, to tell him what I wanted. And I couldn't. I didn't have the answers. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, trying to clear my mind, I saw him walk across the yard. He didn't look at me, didn't even glance in my direction. He was focused on the task at hand, mowing the lawn, but I couldn't help but watch him. It was as if something inside of me was drawing me to him, even as I told myself I should stay away. I was lost in thought when I heard the hum of the mower stop. I looked up to see him standing there, staring at me. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made my heart race. He walked toward me slowly, his steps measured, as if he were trying to give me time to react. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but firm, like he was trying to break through the silence that had been growing between us. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "I'm fine," I said, my voice too tight. I wasn't fine, I hadn't been fine for weeks. But I didn't know how to say that. Tom didn't buy it. "No, you're not," he said quietly. "We both know that." I swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do, Tom," I admitted, my voice shaky. "I don't know how to handle this, us." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between us. "I don't know either," he said softly. "But I can't keep pretending like nothing happened. We both know that things have changed. And we can't go back to the way it was." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I don't know what else to do. Everything feels so wrong." Tom stood there, silent for a moment, his eyes searching mine. "I don't want to hurt you either," he said, his voice steady but filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "But I don't think we can keep pretending either. You've been distant. I've been distant. We're both stuck in this place where we're too afraid to move forward. I felt the weight of his words settle into me, and a wave of guilt washed over me. He was right. We couldn't go back. We couldn't undo what had happened. But that didn't make it any easier. It didn't make it any less complicated. How could I possibly navigate this? How could I continue to live with this constant ache, this constant reminder of what I had done? I didn't mean for this to happen, I said softly, my eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But I don't know what to do. Tom reached out, his hand brushing against mine. His touch was warm, comforting, but also filled with an intensity one wasn't ready to confront. You don't have to have all the answers, he said, his voice gentle but firm. But we have to face it. We can't keep running from it. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. He was right. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. But that didn't make the decision any easier. What was I supposed to do now? What was the right thing? I'm so sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know, he said softly. I don't want to make things worse, but we can't keep living in this limbo. We have to face it, whatever it is. I opened my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time since everything had started, I felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was there. I had to choose which direction to go. I don't know what the future holds, I said quietly, but I know I can't keep pretending. I have to make a decision. I have to choose. Tom nodded slowly, his expression softening. And I'll be here, no matter what. You don't have to make this decision alone. I could feel the weight of his words settle into my heart, and for the first time in days, I felt a little lighter. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing, I couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. I had to face it, face the consequences of my actions, and figure out what I truly wanted. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was ready to make that choice. The days that followed felt like a constant battle. I couldn't escape the thoughts that kept swirling in my mind, the guilt, the uncertainty, the overwhelming desire to do something, anything, to make sense of everything. I had made a decision, or at least, I had told myself I had. But the weight of that decision was becoming heavier with every passing day. I couldn't look at Tom the same way anymore. It wasn't that I didn't want to, it was that I couldn't. Every time our eyes met, there was something in them, something that reminded me of what had happened. What we had shared. And I couldn't deny that a part of me felt pulled to him, to the feeling of being seen, of being wanted. It was like a siren call, tempting me to fall deeper into this mess I had created. I tried to focus on the mundane, to carry on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The silence in the house was unbearable. Even when Daniel was home, the space between us felt insurmountable. He hadn't noticed, or if he had, he hadn't said anything. He continued his routine, unaware of the storm that was quietly tearing us apart. I found myself waiting for Tom to make the next move. I didn't know what I wanted him to do, but I knew I couldn't be the one to take the first step. I couldn't bear the thought of making the wrong choice. And yet, I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo. One evening, as the sun was setting, I found myself standing on the porch, lost in thought. The air was heavy, thick with the tension that had been building for days. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. The quiet of the house pressed down on me, and I realized, in that moment, that I was suffocating. I heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind me, and I knew it was Tom before I even turned around. I didn't have to look to feel the weight of his gaze, the silent understanding between us. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, just waiting. And I realized, just then, that I had been waiting for him to. "You're not okay," he said, his voice breaking the silence, gentle but firm. I didn't answer right away. What could I say? How could I explain the whirlwind of emotions inside me? The guilt, the fear, the longing. It was all tangled up inside me, and I couldn't find the words to make sense of it. "I don't know what to do," I finally said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what's right anymore. I don't know what I want." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between us. I could feel the tension, the unspoken desire to bridge the gap between us, but I couldn't let myself fall into it again. "Not yet. We don't have to have all the answers right now," Tom said quietly, his voice soft but filled with an urgency I couldn't ignore. "But we can't keep pretending like nothing happened. I can't keep pretending like nothing happened." I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, my hands trembling. "I don't know what this is, but I can't keep living in this uncertainty." Tom's eyes softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like everything. It felt like the first step towards something I didn't know how to face, something that had already begun to shape my future without me realizing it. "You don't have to figure it all out now," he said gently. "But you don't have to carry this alone." I closed my eyes, feeling his words settle into me. I had spent so much of my life hiding, burying my emotions and desires beneath layers of duty and expectation. And now, I didn't know how to stop. How could I allow myself to feel something, to want something that I knew could destroy everything? "I don't know how to fix this," I said softly, my voice breaking. "I don't even know if it can be fixed." Tom nodded slowly, understanding. "I don't know either. But I know that we can't keep running from it. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it isn't." I stood there, silent, trying to process everything that was happening. The uncertainty, the fear, the guilt, it all felt so overwhelming. But in that moment, I realized something. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I was fine, when I knew deep down that I wasn't. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what happens next. I'm scared of what this means." Tom took a step closer, his hand gently resting on my arm. "I'm scared too," he said quietly. "But I don't think we can move forward unless we face this together." I wanted to pull away, to shut it all out, but something in his words, in his touch, held me there. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. I felt like someone understood, like someone cared. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said, my voice trembling. "But I know I can't keep pretending that everything's okay." "We don't have to have all the answers," Tom said again, his voice steady and calm. "We just have to take the next step. And we'll figure it out together." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't clarity, not exactly. But it was something else. A sense of possibility, maybe. A sense of hope. "I don't know what this is, but I don't want to lose it," I said softly, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't want to lose you." Tom's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his hand gently brushing against my cheek. "You won't lose me," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out. We'll find a way." And in that moment, I realized that I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to know what came next. But I knew one thing: I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I had to face what was between us, face the consequences of my actions, and decide what I was willing to risk. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't the end, not yet. But it was a beginning. And maybe that was all I needed to move forward. We stood there, together, in silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in the mess I had created. The following days were a blur of quiet conversations and tentative moments. I couldn't escape the feeling of impending change, of a shift I couldn't control, and yet, in some strange way, I was drawn to it. There was something undeniably magnetic about the new reality that had emerged between Tom and me. It was something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I tried to deny it. And yet, every time I tried to acknowledge it fully, guilt rushed in like a tidal wave, drowning me in its weight. I tried to distract myself with the ordinary routines of life. I cleaned, I cooked, I made small talk with Daniel, pretending that nothing had changed. But each word felt hollow, each action an empty repetition of the life I had been living. It was as though I was playing a part in a drama I no longer felt connected to, as if I were a character in someone else's story. Daniel continued his usual routine, seemingly unaware of the tension that had settled over our home. I sometimes wondered if he truly didn't notice, or if he simply didn't care. Our marriage had been like a steady, undisturbed river for so long, flowing without incident. But now, the waters were rough, the current turbulent. Yet, Daniel sailed along as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had shifted beneath the surface. Tom, on the other hand, seemed to be constantly on my mind. Every time he was near, I could feel the weight of our unspoken words, the tension between us thick and palpable. We didn't talk much, at least, not about what had transpired. But there was an unspoken understanding between us, a mutual recognition that things had changed. And yet, we both seemed to be afraid of the consequences, afraid of what would happen if we allowed ourselves to confront the reality of what had begun to take root between us. One evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen again, lost in thought as I prepared dinner. The knife in my hand felt strangely heavy as I sliced the vegetables, my mind far away from the task at hand. I could hear Tom's footsteps approaching, the sound of them echoing softly through the quiet house. I didn't turn around at first, too caught up in the storm inside my mind. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice low, hesitant. I hesitated for a moment before responding. "No, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile, though it felt unnatural. There was a long silence between us as he stood there, watching me. I could feel his gaze on my back, and I knew he was waiting for something, waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge what had happened between us. Finally, I put the knife down, turning to face him. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said quietly. "We do." The words hung in the air between us, thick and heavy, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. I didn't know where to begin, how to even start unraveling the mess we had made. I didn't know if there was even a way back from it. "I don't know what's happening," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't know how we got here." Tom nodded, his eyes soft but serious. "Neither do I. But I know that we can't keep pretending like everything's fine. We've crossed a line. And we can't just go back to the way things were." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. He was right, of course. We couldn't just pretend. But the thought of facing the consequences, of acknowledging what we had done, was terrifying. How could I face Daniel? How could I face myself? "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." Tom reached out, gently taking my hand in his. "I know you didn't. But this is where we are now. And we can't just ignore it. We have to decide what comes next." The weight of his words sank into me like a stone. What did come next? How could I possibly make that decision? I had spent so much of my life doing what was expected of me, keeping the peace, keeping everything together. And now, here I was, standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand, something that could change everything. I don't know if I can do this, I said softly, my voice trembling. I don't know if I can face the consequences of what we've done. Tom's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. You don't have to face it alone, he said quietly. We'll figure it out together. But how could we? How could we possibly move forward from here? The weight of the decisions before me felt unbearable, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to carry them. I had already betrayed my marriage, betrayed everything I thought I knew about myself. And now, I was standing at the precipice of something else entirely. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice barely audible. I can't keep living in this uncertainty. I have to make a decision. Tom nodded slowly, his expression serious. I know. And whatever you decide, I'll be here. But we can't keep pretending like nothing happened. I felt a lump form in my throat, and I had to fight to keep the tears at bay. The storm inside me was growing stronger, threatening to tear everything apart. But I knew he was right. We couldn't keep pretending. I don't know what the future holds, I said softly, but I know I can't keep living in this limbo. I have to make a choice. Tom took my hand again, his grip gentle but firm. And you don't have to make it alone, he said quietly. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling his presence beside me, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone. And maybe that was the first step toward figuring out what came next. I'll figure it out, I said quietly, though I wasn't sure how. But in that moment, I knew I had to. Tom didn't say anything else. He simply held my hand, and together, we stood there in the silence of the kitchen, knowing that whatever came next, we would have to face it head-on. I wasn't ready for what lay ahead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew I couldn't keep running. The decision had to be made, and I had to face the consequences of my actions. And for better or worse, that was the first step toward finding my way out of the storm. The days after that conversation with Tom felt like a strange limbo, a place where nothing was certain, but everything had already begun to change. We hadn't talked about what had happened between us in any direct way since then, but there was an unspoken agreement between us. We were no longer pretending. Whatever it was that had happened, whatever it had meant, we were both in it now. There was no escaping that fact. I spent those days caught in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I couldn't stop thinking about Tom, about everything we had said and done, and yet, it all felt like a secret I wasn't allowed to share. How could I explain this to anyone? To Daniel? To myself? The house felt colder. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I found myself more and more isolated, even as I was surrounded by people. Daniel continued to go about his day-to-day, oblivious as always, and yet I could feel the distance between us growing. It was like we were in different worlds, living side by side, but never truly together. I wanted to talk to him, to tell him what had been weighing on my heart, but I didn't know how to start. How could I possibly tell him what had happened? How could I destroy everything with one simple admission of guilt? I had avoided Tom for most of the week, too. I didn't know what to say to him either. I couldn't just pretend like things hadn't shifted between us. I couldn't ignore the fact that the connection between us had become something much deeper, something much more complicated than I had ever anticipated. But every time I saw him, I felt like I was walking through a fog, unsure of where I was going or what I was doing. One evening, after dinner, when Daniel had retreated to his study to work, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a moment to think, to breathe. But my thoughts were clouded. There was a weight to the silence, a heaviness that I couldn't shake. I heard footsteps, soft but steady, and I knew it was Tom before I even saw him. He walked into the room, standing there for a moment, just looking at me. The look in his eyes was familiar, but it was different now. There was a new depth to it, something that spoke of everything we had shared and everything we had yet to face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, caught in the space between us. I knew he was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know where to start. I had never felt so lost. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "We can't keep living like this." I nodded slowly, the truth of his words hitting me with a force I hadn't expected. We couldn't keep pretending. But how could we move forward? What was the next step? I had no answers, no idea what to do. "I know," I said quietly, looking down at my hands. "I don't know what to do, Tom. I'm so confused." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between us. "It's okay to be confused," he said softly. "But we can't keep hiding from this. We need to figure out what happens next." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. I had been avoiding the truth for so long, trying to pretend like everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I had been running from the inevitable, but I couldn't run anymore. The truth was there, staring me in the face, and I had to confront it. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I'm scared of what comes next. I'm scared of what this means." Tom's voice softened, his tone filled with empathy. "I'm scared too," he said quietly. "But we can't let fear control us. We have to face this, whatever it is." I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the person standing in front of me, not the confusion, not the uncertainty, but the reality of who we were in that moment. We had crossed a line, yes, but that didn't mean it was the end. We didn't have to know everything, but we did need to face it. We needed to stop pretending, stop running, and figure out what we wanted and what we were willing to risk. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I said softly, my heart racing. "But I can't keep pretending. I have to make a choice." Tom nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding. "And whatever choice you make, I'll be here. But we can't keep living in the unknown." I stood there for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The decision, the guilt, the fear, it all felt so overwhelming. But I knew he was right. We couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay. We had to face the consequences of our actions, no matter how difficult that might be. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I need time," I said, my voice firming slightly. "I need to think. I need to figure out what I want." Tom stepped back, giving me space. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." I nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude and relief wash over me. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a choice. I could take control of my own life, of my own destiny, and I could decide what came next. The room felt quieter after he left, and I was left alone with my thoughts. But I wasn't as lost as I had been. I knew that I had to face the consequences of what had happened, but I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. Whatever came next, I had to confront it with honesty, with courage. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would face the truth. I would face whatever came next, no matter how difficult. The first step was acknowledging that everything had changed, and that was the hardest part. But I was ready. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe.